I control the girls. I like to take pictures and threaten them to show it to their families so I can get them to do what I want, when I say it. I like power and money.
You know, I have to control people. I'm in the business of people. I like to have good customer satisfaction. But sometimes, these girls don't do what I want. And you know what I tell them? I say, look, it's either you or your family. So pick one and get back out there and make me some money.
What did I tell you, Corey? What did I tell you? The last thing you do something wrong.
We met at a football game. He was so nice at first. He took me out to dinner, and he bought me all this jewelry. He just needed money one day, so he put me in this room, and then some guy came and he raped me.
My family didn't like me, and they never gave me enough money. And one day, this guy approached me and told me how I could make a lot of money. And I was reluctant, but he offered me so much. But next thing I knew, I was being offered up to 14 times a day.
In today's society, sex is popularized, from music to movies to TV shows to video games. It's everywhere, on billboards and shopping malls, on the internet, in entertainment, in stripping clubs and casinos. Sex covers every corner of the internet. Thousands of non-porn related websites advertise sex or women being sold for sex. Countless sites display nude women performing sexual acts. What people don't know is that outside of the porn star professions, most of these women are forced there against their will. Millions of people, women and children especially, are beaten and sexually exploited every year. With more than 28 million slaves across the world today, more than there ever has been in history, human trafficking has become the second largest organized crime in the world. Earning more than $32 billion a year, it has become the fastest growing criminal industry, right behind drug trafficking.
I didn't realize I was a victim of trafficking until I started opening the well house. In my mind, because I had chosen to run away at 15 years old, that it was my choice. The abuse and that was happening on the streets was my fault. And I'm just now, at 43 years old, walking through this with a counselor, understanding that I have a 14-year-old now, and I look at her and I go, there is no cognitive way I could have been able to make those decisions.
The recruiters are slick. They look like everybody else, and they're gonna find you at a vulnerable moment. And when he tells you that he loves you, when you have sex with him, he knows at that point that he has you right where he wants you. And he may take some pictures of you and say, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to show this to your parents, or I'm going to send these pictures out to everybody in the school. He may say, if you don't do this, I'm going to hurt your little brother, I'm going to hurt your little sister. Or he may just say, if you don't do what I'm asking you to do, I'm going to beat you up, and he does.
One of the things they tell you is you have a gold mine between your legs. I will show you how to use it. And that doesn't happen immediately. That happens over a period of time. And as people, we all have insecurities. And if we don't have insecurities, I can develop them in you.
I met up with a friend who was supposed to take me to Walmart and get a money order so I could pay my phone bill. And instead of taking me to Walmart, she actually took me to her pimp's house. And her pimp was driving. I didn't know she was a prostitute. And we got there and they took me upstairs and they did a body search. And they actually had pictures in their computer of like thousands and thousands of women. And they picked out a picture that looked most like me. And they named me Stephanie. And then they ended up taking me to the Country Inn and Suites by the Horseshoe Casino. And they made a post on Craigslist and posted the picture of the girl that looked similar to me with Stephanie, and that's how they got their customers. So it was a pretty fast process.
What is sex trafficking? Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purposes of commercial sex, induced by force, beating or slapping, confinement, seasoning or initiation, rape, gang rape, sexual assault, torture practices. Fraud, false promises, feigned affection, deceitful enticement, blackmail, extortion, preying on desperation. Coercion, intimidation or humiliation, establishing quotas, threats of serious harm or restraint, emotional abuse, creating dependency, abusive behavior, climate of fear. What many people don't know is that human trafficking is common on a lot of the major highways. In fact, truck stops is a key place for child trafficking. I-20 was even labeled the sex trafficking superhighway.
Sex trafficking is no respecter of persons. It's no respecter of socioeconomic class, of gender, of race, of any ethnicity. It just doesn't care. The traffickers, the pimps, the Johns don't care.
So why does human trafficking exist? It's a business, and with a business comes the principles of supply and demand. When individuals are willing to buy commercial sex, they create a market and make sexual exploitation profitable. Unfortunately, those individuals exist in America by the millions. Human traffickers are people willing to go the lengths of victimizing others in order to get profits. They currently exploit the overall market incentives of high profit and low risk. A large part of why this low risk exists is when the community is unaware about the issue, leaving the people vulnerable and the trafficking invisible. Ignorance of this issue fuels it.
I think that more people don't know about human trafficking because they, much like me a couple years ago, didn't think that it happened right where they lived. And when you see it as something that's very, very foreign and far away from where we are, you don't see that you are able to help at all and make an impact, and therefore there's no reason to know about it.
I think most people have an image of what it's supposed to be or what they've seen in the media or what they've seen in the movies, and they don't realize that this is stuff that's happening in their backyard, and it's happening to their daughters and to their neighbors' daughters, and it's happening in the high schools, and it's happening at football games, and it's everywhere.
I am the statistic that within 48 hours I was approached by a pimp. And for 3 weeks he kept me in a lab, really. It was a chemistry lab, and taught me everything I needed to know about cocaine and told me not to do it, ever. And I was selling it because I had to make money, and that was the way I was helping him, and he had 4 girls living with him, and I knew what they were doing. And so one night he gave me drugs, and he told me I needed to bring in this amount of money, but I didn't have enough drugs to bring in that amount of money. And so I had to do what I had to do to start to make up for it. Well, I don't care if it is submitted sex, because it's paid sex, it's still rape. And so I started using the drugs. Actually, he offered them to me.
That's appealing to somebody who's maybe a little bit younger, who's never had any attention. Nobody ever told her she was pretty. Nobody ever told her that she was smart. And they do all that stuff, and that traps them in. And then all of a sudden, the guy says, well, hey, baby, I love you, but I can't pay the rent. So if you love me, then I really need some help paying the rent. And then they slowly get them into that.
The control and the manipulation a person has over you, whether you want to call them a drug dealer, a pimp, a trafficker, doesn't begin. It's kind of like domestic violence times a million. He doesn't hit you on the first date. It doesn't happen immediately. It's a consistent beating down psychologically. I'm the only one who loves you. I'll take care of you. You mean the world to me. Those types of things, followed behind the abuse, creates a bond that you feel like they are the only one who loves you, because society looks at us as dirt. You can't rape a prostitute. You can't kill her. You can't hurt her. She's choosing to be that way, so she's already trash. And being arrested is reinforced by society consistently. And then how many times have cars ridden by me as I stood on the street corner knowing that I had to be there, because if not I would get beaten again. And no one stopped to help me and to say, why? What do you need? How can I help you? I love you. God loves you. No one was able to say that. But when I went home, he would say that.
The pimps know how to say I love you in a way that is compelling to the victim and really causes the victim to accept conditions of living that the person would not accept but for that, but for the belief, at least for a temporary period of time, that the pimp loves them. This is much like domestic abuse cases. This is also why you can find a person who can be victimized more than once, because that human need is so compelling that people will suffer much if they believe that they are being loved. It's almost impossible for that victim to meaningfully participate in an investigation, but particularly in a prosecution. And that's because it's clear that every time a victim who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder is presented with some of the operative facts of what happened to that victim, the victim not only remembers, but the victim relives what happened.
One of the more brutal things that I've investigated occurred during interviews with some of my victims, and my victims will tell me horrific things that these men do to them. One example was one of the girls was beaten with soap in a sock, and I asked her, soap in a sock, what's that? And she says, oh, it's when he puts a bar of soap into a sock and he beats me with it. And I said, well, why would he do that? And she says, so he doesn't get bruises on his hands, because he beats me so hard that if he beat me with his hands, he would have bruises.
It's sad to see some of these people and some of these victims live like they live. And, it's not uncommon for us to find girls or recover girls that, they're full of bruises.
Some people just see it as it's just females out there trying to make money. They don't realize that these females just didn't stumble upon this. They just didn't say one day, I want to be a prostitute. A lot of them are forced into it.
I had started running away at 12, and my probation officer looked at me and she said, when's the last time you had sex? It wasn't, have you been abused? Did someone force you? Did someone make you? And so at 12 years old, thinking I'm grown, I thought I had consented to sex, and I had not. It was abuse.
Human trafficking in Alabama is a Class B felony, which can lead to imprisonment up to 10 years. Trafficking a minor is a Class A felony, which can lead to up to 20 years in prison. The only thing you can do in Alabama and get more jail time is capital murder. So we treat this, particularly the trafficking of a minor, as the highest possible offense that an individual can face. We need our laws to be so strong that people who violate them know they're going to prison for a long time and may lose everything they've got, because it is a big cash business.
All criminals are in it usually to make $1. They don't care about their victims. They're all in it for the dollar. And they are going to be making, in this type of business, they can be making hundreds, thousands, or we've even had $500,000 in one of the businesses made. And that's the type of what drives the business, what drives them to keep going, and that's why we get involved to try to put a stop to it by putting a stop to the money side.
With sex, you can resell a girl. You can resell her many hundreds of times or thousands of times. Whereas with drugs, you need to get that commodity and have a continuous supply of it if you're going to make money. But off one girl, you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars with that one person.
So why does human trafficking exist? It's a business, and with a business comes the principles of supply and demand. When people are willing to buy commercial sex, they create a market and make sexual exploitation profitable. Unfortunately, these people exist in America by the millions. Human traffickers are people willing to go the lengths of victimizing others in order to get profit. They currently exploit the overall market incentives of high profit and low risk. A large part of why this low risk exists is when the community is unaware about the issue, leaving people vulnerable and the trafficking invisible. Ignorance of this issue fuels it.
There's three components that we look at with regard to sex trafficking. There's the victim, obviously. That's where we begin. Then there's the perpetrator. We focus on the perpetrator because we are enforcement, we're prosecution oriented. So that third entity is you have the perpetrator and you have the victim, but you also have the consumer. And somewhere we need a cultural change that actually impacts all three of those.
The FBI has a victim-oriented approach when dealing with these types of investigations, and so when we first come upon what we consider a victim of an investigation, we try and ingratiate ourselves with them, and befriend them, and let them know that law enforcement is there to help them, and that they are not the subject of the investigation. It's really, really difficult because oftentimes people don't trust the system or have had bad experiences with law enforcement, or even if they've never had an experience with law enforcement, they fear the fact that the FBI is now sitting in a room with them.
What we have seen is a large group of people that are very vulnerable, and some we contact and we start helping and they just vanish from here.
Most of our cases start with the victims themselves, and it's important for them to come forward and tell us what's going on, because without that, we have nothing. We could have all the suspicion in the world that they have a pimp, or that they're maybe not doing this by their own choice, but if they don't tell us, we're essentially done, and there's nothing we can do.
There's a couple of different phases that are hard. Part of that would be the charging decision, who you charge and what offense you charge each respective defendant with. It's also difficult at times marshaling the evidence. This type of case, whether it's child exploitation or human trafficking, have victims that often, for example, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, or have other things in their background that are actually the causes for them being vulnerable and being susceptible to either exploitation or trafficking. Those same things can create difficulties in dealing with individuals as witnesses.
There's a lot of telephone calls, search warrants to be gone through, phones, computers, a lot of interviews. It's a long, drawn-out process where it involves not just one or two detectives. It could involve a lot of detectives and a lot of agencies, because these people travel around. After we get phone tolls and whatnot, it could lead to another state, East Coast, West Coast. It's a long, drawn-out process.
We cannot investigate and prosecute our way out of this problem, and it is a very significant problem. It's not unlike the, quote, war on drugs. And anyone who ever thought that the purpose on the war on drugs was to investigate and prosecute our way out of drug trafficking, I think fails to understand what that system is really about.
I believe there's a statistic out there that 1% of the predators are actually convicted in cases of human trafficking.
It takes so many agencies and so many people assisting these young people. It's very labor intensive. A lot of times the individuals we come into contact with, they basically have nothing. We will start with basic needs and work on up. Some of the investigations will take over a year, and that's a lot of people helping these young individuals. And even after the investigation, it seems like we have continued contact. So it takes a village. It takes a lot of people, a lot of agencies helping these individuals.
The hardest part probably is, under certain circumstances, the sheer volume of contact that you have to have in order to make a recovery. Not every prostitute that we come up with in any of these investigations is a victim or is participating in human trafficking. And in my opinion, the way to make recovery is just to do a lot of operations and continue investigating it. It has to be an ongoing process.
Working narcotics, you can help somebody get out of doing narcotics, or if you remove somebody who is a source of supply, if they're bringing in a bunch of narcotics, that helps the community. But if you get one girl out of it, whether she's a minor or even the older adult ones, you can really you can save that person's life. And that's pretty powerful.
The victim witness advocate and I would try and get one of the girls a job.
And we would go to her house every morning and call her on the phone and say, wake up, get up, you need to get a job. We have an interview scheduled for you at this time, this place. We'd sit outside her house, beeping the horn, knocking on the door. And she would come to the front door in her pajamas and she'd be angry at us. And we would say, get dressed. And she'd get dressed and we'd put her in the car and we'd drive her down for that interview. And one morning we were driving a girl after we had woken her up a number of days. And I was driving and I looked up in the rearview mirror and she said to me, why can't you be my mother? And I said, what? And I said, you hate me. I arrested you and why would you want me to be your mother? And she said, because you're the only one that cares about me. You're the only one that's ever woken me up at 8 o'clock in the morning and held me accountable. You're the only one that told me to get dressed and get a job. And I like that. And that really hit home. Another girl told me, and my victim witness advocate, that the best day of her life was when she met the FBI, but it was also the worst day of her life because she had been arrested and she thought everything was just terrible. And then all of a sudden, after working with our victim witness advocates and all the wraparound services that she was provided, she saw that it really was the best day of her life, the day that she was arrested.
It's consistently a part of your life until there is healing that begins to take place and there is community around you. Because what happens is the girls are so vulnerable, and any girl or boy can be talked into trafficking. It is so simple and so easy, and it doesn't happen immediately. It's over a period of time. And then all of a sudden you owe me, and because of what has happened prior to the you owe me, the person does feel like you owe them, that you owe that pimp something, or you owe that girl something that's trying to talk you into it because she's bought you nice clothes or whatever. And it doesn't go away until true healing starts taking place. There is no choice in prostitution. No girl, no boy, no child, no woman would ever choose to prostitute themselves if they're healthy physically and mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Because when you have all 4 components in place, you have community around you that will look at you and go, he's not a nice guy. And you'll listen to them because you love and trust them, and they have your back. But these girls are isolated, or these children are isolated, or these kids are isolated, or even adults are isolated. And everything is taken away from them, and all they have to look for is that affection and the love that comes from them. And that comes behind the beatings too.
There are 28 million people in the world who are enslaved today. More than at any time ever in the history of the world. And 28 million people, that's 5.5 times the population of the state of Alabama. So it's a staggering problem that we've got to find ways to combat here in our own country, and that we've got to find ways to combat internationally.
On November 10, 2009, Antoinette Davis reported her 5-year-old daughter, Shania, missing from her home. Later that day, a surveillance camera in a hotel 30 miles away displayed a man carrying a girl matching Shania's description. After a strenuous investigation, the man was identified by the police as Mario McNeil, and it was discovered that Antoinette Davis had sold her daughter to McNeil as a sex slave to pay off a drug debt. Shania was raped and murdered by McNeil in the back of his car, and her body was found 6 days later. McNeil was charged with first-degree kidnapping, first-degree murder, and first-degree rape of a child. Davis was charged with human trafficking and felony child abuse. Antoinette Davis sold her own child into the sex trafficking industry. This story, just one out of millions, confirms the fact that anyone can be trafficked, and anyone can be a trafficker.
Hey, Daddy. I love you. Call me back.
Ultimately, the hope of anyone who works in this system, the hope of anyone who deals with these victims, is that there will be a cultural change that is significant enough to keep people from wanting to, number one, be pimps, and number two, be Johns, be the consumer of the service.
Recognize the value of who you are, and that what you have isn't for sale, it's to give, and it's to give at the right place and the right time to the right person. And it's not anyone who asks you to do anything other than that doesn't care for you.
We need a cultural change. If we can focus our communities not on the sex that pop culture has popularized, but the true meaning behind it, we can stop the mindset that sex is a commodity and people are property. We cannot allow human beings to be bought and sold as slaves. We must fight back. And to do that, we must be aware of everything that is happening around us. We must see the worth in every individual. Please realize that you are not an exception to who these traffickers want. There is no exception. This can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime.